This is a true story about what happens when a simple curiosity about heritage turns into a life-altering revelation. I'll walk you through what happened when a past I never knew about suddenly came crashing into my future. I'm Chelsea, and this is The Milkman's Daughter. After that conversation with my mom, it was clear her memory was not going to help me. She didn't have a name, not even a physical description. But to her credit, this was nearly 38 years ago. If I wanted answers, I was going to have to find them myself. So I went back to where it all started, on Ancestry. 3 years earlier, I had reached out to a few of the DNA matches. Most never responded, and the ones who did weren't much help. Just vague responses or silence. But now, things were different. I wasn't just curious anymore. I was on a mission. So I turned my subscription back on and decided if there was anything to be found, I was going to find it. All those years growing up watching Law and Order and Murder, She Wrote with my mom and growing up to watch true crime documentaries, this was my moment. I was going full-on detective. I started with that mystery match, the one I had stared at so many times over the past 3 years and wondering, just who are you? L. Smith 84. The number of times I stared at that username on my screen, just wondering who this person could possibly be. And now I was really determined to find out just who they were. I looked again at the amount of centimorgans that we shared and back to the chart that explained the possible relationship that we could have. 1,689 centimorgans is a lot of DNA to share with somebody. So that means grandparent, aunt or uncle, half-sibling. I'd never thought that they were a grandparent or even an aunt or uncle, mostly because of that 84. I just knew that had to be a year. It just made sense. Now more than ever, I was convinced this had to be a half-sibling. I had another sibling and I just knew it. And I clicked on their profile and started looking around at our shared matches. And then I thought I'd check to see if they had a family tree they had started working on. You can manually build a tree on Ancestry. And if you're lucky, that user will keep that public so that you can actually see it. This person hadn't logged onto the app since about 2018. You can see that within the app. So I wasn't super hopeful. But I clicked on it regardless, hoping there was something there. And that's when I saw 2 names, and they looked to be grandparent names. They were fully listed with their birth year and the date of death. So I did what any modern day detective does, took it to Google, plugged in those names, and ended up on a genealogy website. The names matched as a couple from Oklahoma with 5 kids. And right away I felt a spark of hope. This family was from the same area that my mom grew up in. I started looking through the list of 5 children listed beneath the grandparent names, seeing if I could locate my mystery match. All 5 of the kids listed were boys, the youngest 2 being almost 70. I began making my way down the list, clicking on each name to open up a new page and see their list of children. I was quickly realizing that these 5 brothers were probably potential fathers. And when I clicked on one of the brothers near the bottom of the list and began working my way down his list of children named, I suddenly became even more sure because I saw a name that stopped me in my tracks. Landon Smith, born in 1984. I knew this couldn't be just a coincidence. It had to be him. Everything just lined up. It was the only thing that made sense. So I took that name, paired it with the town and state. I went back to Google, trying to narrow down my results. And there he was, right at the top of my results. A photo of him in what appeared to be some sort of law enforcement uniform. And the second I saw his face, I knew, because I saw me. Something about the shape of his face, his eyes. It was like looking in the mirror and seeing a male version of myself, something I hadn't ever experienced before. It was eerie. But when I clicked onto the article that was attached to the photo, that's when my heart sank. It was his obituary. He had passed away in 2020. I felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. All this time, my mystery match, this person who held the key to my identity, was gone before I ever had a chance to even find him. I stared at that picture for a long time, seeing myself in him, feeling this strange mix of connection and grief for someone I never even knew. It felt a little strange to be grieving for this complete stranger. But over the past 3 years, I had periodically opened up my Ancestry app just to look at this name, feeling this connection, because obviously there was one. This person was my family. I just couldn't put a name to him. So when I finally had that, and when I realized that he was probably my brother, and to see that he was gone before I even had a chance to know him at all, it was such a odd kind of grief, one I had certainly never experienced before. I've experienced loss, but this was new. I was grieving the loss of someone I never had the opportunity to know, a person I should have known, I should have had a relationship with, I should have grown up with, but I was robbed of that opportunity and now just left with an obituary. I clicked into his obituary, hoping to at least find some answers, and I got it. I looked through the names of the family members that had been listed and went back to the genealogy site and matched them there as parents and siblings. His family, my family, it looked like. Now I had more names, and I went to the next best place that a modern day detective goes to, Facebook. First up was one of Landon's sisters. I found her profile pretty quickly and started scrolling through whatever pictures she had that were public that I could look through. And I'm just scrolling through trying to find a good close-up picture that I could see, like who she was. And then I found one, a good close-up picture, several years old, but it stopped me in my tracks. It's so odd to look at this picture, even still. She looked like me, and I mean really looked like me. Blonde hair, same chin, the profile. It was so bizarre. I immediately took a screenshot and sent it to my sister. Her response? No way you have another sister named Tiffany. Since I was fairly certain I had found who my father should be, I couldn't stop the investigating now. I continued Facebook creeping for days. Me and my sweet husband and a fellow sleuthing friend, we were deep in it, digging through profiles, public records, Google, white pages, anywhere that we could find more clues. Eventually, I ended up back on Ancestry to start building out what I knew. Landon and Tiffany's parents had been married before I was born. And Landon, he was 6 months old at the time I would have been conceived. So there it was. My father was married when I would have been conceived. I had spent hours researching this family. I needed to know, and I needed the truth. but it wasn't going to come without a cost. Ever since that first conversation with my sister, I had this ache in my stomach, a pit of anxiety that just wasn't going away. I had started seeing a therapist, not just for this, but because I was unraveling. Well-meaning friends told me I should probably slow down. Even my therapist thought I was maybe moving too fast. From the date that I had received that text from my sister up until this point had just been a mere matter of weeks. I went from learning that I had a different dad to now finding, I believe, my dad and family in such a short amount of time that I hadn't even really had time to process any of this. I couldn't focus on anything else. I certainly couldn't let myself realize what all of this actually meant. I was just too determined to get past this point. To say that I was obsessed with all of this would be a bit of an understatement. I spent hours just looking at all of the information I had found over and over again. I was digging into all of the genealogy, making sure I really understood what all of the numbers meant, that what I was looking at was actually what I thought I was looking at. I needed to know for sure that I wasn't just coming up with this out of nowhere. I wanted to understand it. I needed to understand it. So I'm not saying the concern from others wasn't right. I just wasn't ready to hear it. I knew the only way that pit was going to leave my body was if I followed the trail all the way to the end. The problem was I was stuck. Now that I had this information, what was I going to do with it? Reach out to this family, possibly disrupt their entire lives? Or do I keep it to myself, bury the truth down, and never tell anyone? I was sort of stuck in this loop. And one day, while I was vacuuming of all things, I had this strange thought that hit me. What if Landon's dad wasn't my dad? Because he actually had a twin. And I had never considered it before. But what if they were identical twins? So if they're identical twins, that would mean that genetically they're identical. And so the children of either one of them would show up genetically as being related more like a half-sibling than a cousin. So even though Landon and Tiffany both look like me, they may actually just be my cousins. I immediately dropped the vacuum, called my mom, and started rambling through my theory. She told me that this was very unlikely, and honestly, I agreed. But I couldn't ignore the possibility. So I went back to Ancestry and began pulling up the other twin brother's name and digging into his life. What I found was that he had been married and had a son, gotten divorced, and then remarried again to who he's married to now. But right between those two marriages, there was a gap that lined up with when I would have been conceived. It was just enough to keep me wondering, just enough to make me question everything all over again. Because now I had two possibilities, 2 men, 2 brothers, but just one truth. I knew the only way I was going to get my answers would be to reach out to one of them. Now, was I ready for that? I wasn't sure. But I knew one thing. I couldn't turn back now. This is no longer just about names in a tree. This is about finding out who I was and where I came from. Up to this point, I had done so much research, so much digging into the lives of an entire family, people who had no idea I was looking for them. And honestly, it started to feel pretty intrusive. I'd gone so deep into the rabbit hole that I even knew where some of these people vacationed, who they were married to, when they got divorced. It really is incredible and almost terrifying what you can learn with just a few clicks. But I was exhausted, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, still in a state of shock, and still no closer to the final answer I was chasing. By this point, I had it narrowed down to two possible men, two brothers, twins, and one of them was my biological father. And yet, I had reached the end of what research could offer me. No more leads, just a giant question mark and a pit in my stomach that refused to go away. I still had those closest to me encouraging me to wait, not to rush into anything, and just sit with it. And I tried. I really did. But the more I sat with it, the more resolute I became. I just couldn't stay in limbo. I needed resolution. Not just for curiosity's sake, but because I felt like a ghost in my own life, like I was walking around with this invisible secret, and the only person who could release me from it didn't even know I existed. I also kept thinking about how whoever he was, he also deserved to know the truth. And selfish or not, I didn't want to be the one carrying this burden alone. I didn't choose this. But now that I knew, I couldn't unknow it, and I couldn't pretend it didn't matter. So I made a decision. I was going to try to reach out. The question here was, how? I had a few social media profiles, some vague connections, but we're talking about men in their late 60s here, not exactly the TikTok generation. I was pretty sure my DMs weren't going to be read. I briefly considered messaging the woman I thought might be my sister. But the idea of sliding into her inbox with, "Hey, I think your dad cheated on your mom with my mom, and here I am." Not how I wanted to break the ice. My husband and I even joked about showing up to one of her Christmas cookie decorating classes and being like, "Hi, can I frost a snowflake? And also, we might be sisters." Funny in theory, not so much in real life. I was stuck. Until one of my friends reminded me, there's always a way. During a conversation with her where I was sharing some of my frustrations, she was getting right to work doing what real ride or die friends do, internet sleuthing. Within minutes, she had a list of potential phone numbers for both brothers. And then she said, "Just call them. What do you have to lose?" A few days later, I'd called my husband and told him that I had to do it before I lost my nerve. So he came home from work early to be with me. I sat down at the end of my bed with a notebook and a pen, a list of names and numbers, and just started calling. The first few, out of service. One was a construction company. Not exactly the dramatic family reunion I'd imagined. Then came a voicemail. It sounded promising, possibly one of the brothers, maybe even the brother. I left a message, vague enough not to scare anyone off, I hoped, detailed enough to pique curiosity. Then the next number, it rang, and someone answered. But I knew immediately it wasn't him. The person was too young sounding. I tried to vaguely explain that I was just exploring some DNA connections, and that's when everything turned. The man exploded. He started yelling and cursing, accusing me of all kinds of strange things. I was in such shock I didn't know what to say. I was shaking. I apologized quickly and hung up as fast as I could, immediately blocked the number. Then I just sat there, and it hit me. I might be in over my head. What was I doing? Cold calling strangers? Dropping emotional bombs into other people's lives? I decided right there I was done. No more phone calls. I did have one more move to make. A last-ditch Facebook message to twin number two's wife. Just another vague message about DNA matches, a quiet little breadcrumb. And that afternoon, something happened I never really expected. My phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I picked it up. And it was one of the twins, the one I had left the voicemail for. I asked him to confirm his name, and he did. it was twin number 1. Okay, here we go. I tried to ease into the conversation slowly, just asking if he had a twin brother. Yes, he did. Then I have to ask, are you identical or fraternal twins? And he responded with, we're identical twins. I could barely hear anything else over the sound of the internal screaming. This revelation now meant that it could be either him or the other twin. One of them was my father. My carefully rehearsed speech was completely derailed at this point. I started rambling about how back in 1984, either he or his brother had met my mom, and I was the result. It was a long pause, a long, breathless pause. And he finally responded, saying that he wasn't in that area at the time, so he couldn't help me. So there it was. Twin number 2 had to be my father. He told me he'd talk to his brother and let him decide what to do with the information. And just like that, the call ended. At this point, I was emotionally wiped, completely drained. But I did have an answer. After everything, the searching, the guessing, and the wondering, I knew who he was. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. Because now the ball was no longer in my court. I had done what I came to do. The truth was out. What happened next? Well, that was going to have to be up to him. And I had no idea what, if anything, he was going to do with the truth that had just been dropped into his life. Thanks so much for listening to The Milkman's Daughter and being part of this journey with me. If you've got a story of your own you'd like to share, you can email me at milkmansdaughterpod@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. And before I go, I'd like to give a big thank you to Michael Stelzer for the beautiful original music you've been hearing throughout the show. It really gives the story its heartbeat.